Welcome back, everyone. This has been a long time coming, and as you can see, I'm really happy about this one. We've got someone who's probably one of the most popular accounts on Twitter at the minute, for the right reasons, though. Yeah, for the right reasons, I must add. So we've got Andrew Saunders from Arbitrum here, and also seems to be passively an honorary NFT member of every single NFT project there is going at the minute as well, which is always a good thing. So Andrew, thanks for taking the time out. I know you guys are absolutely hectic at the minute, and really appreciate you being here. So thanks.
No, my pleasure. Happy to be here. Yeah, thanks for having me.
More than welcome. More than welcome. So yeah, we always do this with guests. I quite like to hear a crypto origin story, but also kind of what you were doing in a past life before you kind of came into this weird and wonderful world of crypto and DeFi and all that fun stuff as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I have a little bit of a non-traditional background, which you can probably tell, but I'll do a quick little recap. So the journey started, actually, funny enough, when I was in high school. I used to go into New York City all the time, and I would go to concerts. And eventually this guy came up to me and he goes, I see you at every show. I don't know who you are. I don't know whose parents lets their kid out all the time. And he was like, I work for this hip hop record label, Tommy Way Records. And he's like, I want to bring hip hop to the suburbs. And this was like during the heyday of, you look up the names and you'll recognize most of them. But that was basically how my quote unquote like marketing journey started. Is I was helping to bring hip hop to the suburbs. And then I think after that, kind of said to myself, I think I want to go into the music industry, and ended up actually going to Vanderbilt down in Nashville, where I worked for Universal Records throughout college, again in marketing. At that point, Napster was kind of taking a toll in the industry, so I said to myself, all right, probably should pivot a little bit into something different. Ended up working in the motion picture industry for a little bit, doing kind of marketing, and I think at that point was really kind of bitten by, let's call it, the Hollywood bug, and was excited. And this was obviously like pre-Entourage. And I remember, at college, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I read this book called The Mailroom, which, again, pre-Entourage. And I said to myself, oh my gosh, this is what I'm born to do, which at the time was, be an agent. And so, moved to LA, knew no one, made minimum wage until I was, 27 years old. But at CAA, I actually, funny enough, started my career in the foundation. So I was building charities and making kind of philanthropic partnerships for major celebrity clients. And then at that point, I was going to be a talent agent, which was the original plan. Took a step back and said, maybe I'll go into marketing instead. And so, at that point in time, we were representing major companies like Coca-Cola, General Motors, Delta Airlines, and really kind of serving as a bridge for them into Hollywood, right? Because a lot of them realized, I want to leverage this world. I want to leverage the impact of this talent, but it's such a different business. No one lives on LinkedIn. It's relationship based. Business models are being invented every day. And so we were really kind of the ones doing that. And my early client was Cisco Systems Technology. So I've been in the tech side, I guess, for quite a long time. Took a step back, and I think at that place, it is such a P&L based business. Even though your strategy, you might be blurring the lines with sales. So I actually went to the founders with one of my partners and said, we want to start our own division. And so at that point, we said, rather than representing brands for retainers into entertainment, operating like kind of Bain McKinsey consultants, we want to go the opposite route. And so we basically started representing, pretty much all of the agency's clients. And so, core clients at the time for us were everyone from, Justin Bieber to Will Smith to will.i.am. The list goes kind of on and on. Tom Hanks, J.J. Abrams. And at that point in time, it was, how do we take these clients into the world of brands in an intelligent way? And so it was really interesting. We almost became what I would call kind of talent managers or client strategists. And it was really kind of an interesting time. Then we kind of took a step back and said, all right, we've got all these incredible ideas, but at the end of the day, they're contingent on, brand funding, marketing cycles, all these things that are very tricky. We said, well, what if we had the money to do this ourselves? And so we actually merged with the M&A team. And at that point, it was, let's come up with the ideas tied to, the 1% of our clients. And then let's go up to Silicon Valley and talk to the Greycrofts and Sequoias of the world to to fund this stuff. And so we basically became a little bit of an in-house incubator, of which a number of those companies that I worked on is actually sold and exited at this point. And I think, at that time, again, we were really serving as this bridge between kind of entertainment and marketing and brand. And this was also when kind of social first started taking off. And so we started to actually build relationships. And so I remember working with, Facebook when there were 2 people in marketing or 1 person in marketing, which at the time I think was Mark's sister, who's become a good friend over the years. But at that point, rather than just being kind of a one-way bridge, it was really turning into this triangle. And so kind of sitting at this epicenter, I guess, of, marketing, media, entertainment, technology, and I think, part of that was, crossing over between these industries, you start to see really interesting business models, and you start to say to yourself, well, why can't I take, a film financing model and apply it to marketing? Or why can't I take, a social media model and apply it to media? And that was kind of exactly what we were doing, was like inventing new marketing models. So, I know for a fact I was one of the first to ever put brands into Netflix original programming, which was Bloodline back in the day.
Is that more like a product placement type stuff?
Yeah. So in the early days, a lot of folks were like, all the viewership's going to Netflix, but there's no advertising on Netflix, and Netflix doesn't want to do integrations on their shows. But I was representing a lot of the creators of those shows. And so, again, if I could work with them to figure out ways to bring, Anheuser-Busch and Budweiser or Patron into those shows that didn't take away from the creative or didn't take away from the show, that's super impactful, right? You're marketing in a way that no other brand is able to, at least at that point in time. Now there's, tons of brands doing this stuff. Another example would be influencer marketing. At the time, influencers didn't exist. Influencer marketing wasn't a thing. And funny enough, eventually my team did represent a lot of the big early influencers. But I remember literally looking at, Justin Bieber's Twitter and saying, how many followers does he have? What percentage of these followers are real? What is the premium CPM rate that I'm going to apply to that? And then I was doing, syndicated influencer social programs in the 7-figure range, when I think back then a lot of big celebrities were, getting paid $25,000 here, $25,000 there. And so, again, just a great example of like taking models from one area, bringing them into another. And then again, just having, I think the brain power and experience to kind of wrap that up in a way that's methodical and intelligent, right? And so, was there for a good, I think 9.5 years, was the youngest agent at the time ever at the company, which was kind of fun. And, at that point in time, I think, we were the industry leaders. I was ready for a change. I think most of us on the team thought we would just go and run our clients' companies, which candidly is kind of what happened. So my old partner is the head of Will Smith's, holding company. Our other partner is the president of, J.J. Abrams Brad Robot. And so, but for me, I think it was a question of, do I want to stay in Hollywood, or do I want to go more, client side or media side? And so, long story short, had been effectively building companies for Google, new media companies for Google with Google dollars. And in the process of doing that, taught myself media buying and planning, and basically built a pretty significant media business inside CAA. And so, I looked at it as, I have the big celebrity talent. I have the greatest producers and storytellers in Hollywood. I now have the reach and scale. I can compete with the traditional media companies. And the funny story is, it was Reebok at the time was in conversations with NBC Universal, where I ended up actually working after. And I was able to basically stitch together a much more significant non-traditional marketing program. And effectively that entire budget moved to my clients instead of NBC Universal. And so we had, Ryan Seacrest, we had Sofia Vergara, we had, folks talking about Reebok on the red carpet. And I think that was kind of that turning point where, NBC Universal and other media companies are like, what is going on here? And so I literally, funny story, I'm literally in Australia at the time on business. And I get an email from senior recruiting at leadership at NBC Universal. And he goes, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know how you do it. I looked at your LinkedIn. I have no idea who you are. He's like, but stop and come do it here instead, before one of our competitors gets it. And that's how I ended up at NBC Universal. And so, went through the, 8-hour interview process and all that. And then long story short was really brought in there, I don't know if you remember these days, but, there was a point in time where every media company was trying to build their own in-house creative agency. The whole idea was, you don't need a creative agency. You can just do it with us. And you saw this pretty much across the board. When I got to NBC Universal, it was a little bit bigger picture than that. They basically said, we've got brands doing $20 million deals here and $10 million deals there. We want you to be the $150 million man. And I was like, I like the sound of that.
Yeah, I'll take that. Don't mind that.
Yeah, exactly. And so really what that meant was like, can you stitch together all of our networks, all of our talent, all of our platforms, all of our capabilities, and convince advertisers that it's worth, coming in at a 9-figure level, right? And basically it was like, I'll try. And then fast forward, about 18 months later, we had a team of about 60 people, and we were doing over $1 billion a year in revenue. Wow. And it was actually more profitable than 2 of our cable networks combined. And so we did it. And I think, for me, like I was thrilled to like see the model prove itself. And, anyone that's familiar with traditional marketing, at least in the US, I mean, you're looking at, an average 30-second spot is probably $300,000. And then if you want to be aggressive from a media standpoint, maybe you're putting in another 3 million in media. So, your typical campaign might be somewhere around, 3.3 million, not taking into account things like Super Bowl. So it gives you a little bit of perspective when you're doing deals at the $150 million range, what that means. And, most of the campaigns that I was working on, based on the data that we had, 97, 98, 99% of the US population saw it at least once, if not more than once. And then, we were actually, the first partner that I did it with was Microsoft. And candidly, I can't share, metrics, but it was so successful that they said, why don't you guys just build a content agency for us? Because it outperformed our traditional marketing, which was kind of crazy. And so, at that point in time, I mean, really the only ones that could afford this was, big tech. So like Amazon, funny enough, the team that ended up hiring me was the team that we worked with at NBCU back in the day, which I'll connect the dots there. Big auto, right? Huge auto launches, the motion picture industry, because you've got, a week or two to basically drive as much ticket sales as possible before, the kiss of death from Rotten Tomatoes. And so it was, it was big companies, and really enjoyed it. I mean, I think I really enjoyed creating holistic 360 campaigns, that lived across every platform. I mean, we were doing things that no one had ever done before. I mean, we did, a live commercial on air, which no one had done in the history of the company. We did the first SNL web series in history, which the way we pulled that off was I represented, along with others at CAA, Broadway Video, the creators of SNL, right? And so when I came in, was able to explain to them the benefit of, audience development and younger generations and things like that. And so they looked at it as a marketing opportunity more than, the parent company trying to force something down them. So really successful there. And I think like my takeaway from that was, folks were a little bit shocked, I think, by how quickly this scaled and how successful it was. And, I basically said to them, I said, the reason that this was so successful was, when I got here, every single company was operating on a different P&L. And you know what that means? It means everyone's competing with one another, right? And so what I would do is go to, CMOs and heads of marketing and all of our networks, because I'm sitting at this, parent company level, and say, listen, I'm not here to steal your job. If anything, I'm here to take your ideas and amplify them. And by the way, like, great ideas can come from anywhere. And I really believe that. And so I think just not having an ego and not being territorial, I think very quickly a lot of folks realized I wasn't a threat. And I even said to them, I said, listen, there's a good chance this company starts to consolidate over time, like most media companies. Like, why don't we think about your future on my team, right? If and when that team dissolves. And so I think just that level of just, empathy and kindness and maybe just like emotional intelligence is candidly like the real reason it took off, in my opinion. Because up until the point I joined, I mean, these networks just were not willing to work together, because everyone was like, I want my 20, I want my 25 million, et cetera. Was under a 3-year contract, which, pretty rare in crypto, but at least in Hollywood, pretty common that you're under, pretty lengthy contracts and agreements. And so literally the day my 3-year contract ended, I resigned. And the background there was, I kind of knew at that point in time, I didn't want to work at a large company. It was the right opportunity for me because I had the ability to work with every brand under the sun, with some of the largest budgets in marketing history. And so it was one of those things where it's like, how do you turn that down? But I'm definitely much more of a, smaller company startup guy. And so, going back to my CAA days when I was building and incubating these Google-backed media companies, a lot of them had asked me, why don't you come in as a co-founder, CMO, chief evangelist, COO, CRO. It just wasn't ready at the time. I think, CAA, while an enormous name in Hollywood, not everybody knows that industry and that company. And so I looked at NBCU as just a way to kind of validate my experience and kind of prove the skill set. And so funny enough, Tastemade had actually been one of these Google companies. And they were backed at that point in time also by like Liberty Media, Discovery Communications, which is, Food Network, HGTV, Travel Channel, et cetera. And funny enough, when I was at NBC Universal, Comcast invested in them, right, which was our parent company. And so, NBCU was able to position it as, Andrew's jumping ship to one of our investments. He's going to help accelerate it. And for me, it was an opportunity to get back more into kind of the world that I enjoy, where I can have a much bigger impact, And so, literally same thing there. Joined. I think I had a team of about 3 folks in marketing. Fast forward about 18, 24 months later, I think I had a team of about 40 across 6 countries. And so it was, I want to say it was about a third of the company at that time, but we had, I had teams all over the US, London, in Shoreditch, funny enough, Paris, Sao Paulo, Tokyo, you name it. And so really interesting because again, we were building a next generation media company. Think if you were going to create Food Network, Travel Channel, HGTV, but for, millennials, where would you create it? How would you create it? So the obvious answer is social. And so that was really exciting because I got to work with, all the platforms directly, right? So I'm working with Facebook and Snapchat and Twitter, on the product side and the platform side. And so, getting to beta test things or experiment with things that weren't public yet. So that was really interesting and exciting. And I think, part of that was what started happening was I was building ad products. So, for example, Instagram would come to us and say, hey, we're working on this new product called Stories. And then I'm sitting here going, well, why can't we turn stories into shows? And why can't we run ads in the middle of stories? And by the way, why can't we turn highlights into episodes? And so, we would do this. And then candidly, we would sell it to advertisers and it would perform. And then a lot of times the platform companies would call me and say, hey, like, that thing you did, we think that could be.
That thing.
Yeah. And I'm like, go for it. Like, I'm not territorial. Like, if you think it's a good idea, take it and run with it. So, so at that point I was running, an in-house marketing agency, yet again, but also building ad products. And it was also interesting too, because I think having those years of both remote, management experience and also the international experience, you really start to understand the nuances from a regional perspective and how to approach global marketing and international marketing. I think a lot of Americans don't get it. I think what they try to do is, let's do this thing here in the US where we're putting all this budget into it. And then, what we'll do? We'll translate it for 25 other countries. And it just doesn't work. I mean, like the example I can give in the US is, I've lived all over the country. I've lived in New York, Nashville, Los Angeles, completely different populations, completely different mindsets. And it's not just those 3. I mean, it's state by state. And when you go to, other countries, I mean, take Europe, it's like, you can't just do a one size fits all for all of Europe. Or even in Latin America, like one of the things I always find so interesting is a lot of, US marketers just think, oh, Spanish language, but they don't understand the like dialect differences between countries, or even that Portuguese is in Spanish, And so I think that was a really great opportunity just to learn more about, all the different regions and cultures and, consumer behavior patterns, because they're so different, right? And then I think, what started happening was I was just doing a lot of really non-traditional kind of first of its kind marketing. I did a television show with Zoe Deschanel and the Points guy for Capital One.
Wow.
I was building new ad products that were leveraging Amazon destination sites for auto brands. And it was really interesting. So long story short, Amazon ends up investing in us. And then literally 2 weeks later, I get this phone call and they're like, we know this isn't typically how things go, but how would you feel if we pulled you out of Tastemade and brought you into corporate headquarters? And at the time I was like, yeah, no, I don't think I want to go back to
No.
a big company. So I, politely pass, and they're like, listen, come up to headquarters, meet the team. And, obviously you never say no to an interview. So I went up there, met the team, candidly really liked the team. It was a lot more diverse, a lot more fun, than I expected it to be. And long story short, they were like, we want to build a new marketing practice. We've been trying to find someone to build it for over 2 years. We didn't think this person existed. We think you're that unicorn. So let's do it. And, I literally looked at kind of not the business plan, but I guess the model, and was like, this is all wrong. This isn't going to be successful. And they basically said to me like, well, why don't you come back to us with what you think is right? And I did. And candidly, they were like, check. And for me, that was an indicator that like, this could be a good opportunity, right? Because they were invested in me. Even before I started, they were willing to listen, which I think is huge. And that, that was the beginning of Amazon. And so quick background there is if you're not, a former employee, I think a lot of people think of Amazon as a data company or a retail company. I like to think of Amazon as a startup factory. And so when I was there, you can think of Amazon Studios as a startup, Alexa as a startup, Whole Foods as a startup, Health as a startup. And so in the early days, very similar to investing in venture companies, a lot of times what you see is in the early days, a lot of brand marketing. It's like, let's create as much awareness as possible. It's a land grab, right? And then at a certain point in time, at the top of that curve, you're like, okay, great. We now own all the real estate. Now we've got to, make this thing profitable. We've got to figure out the business model. We got to turn on the revenue streams, right? And then a lot of times what you'll see is companies, especially in the D2C space, quickly shift from like 100% brand marketing to 100% performance marketing, which in crypto, I think we all like to call it growth. And I think the problem with that is you need a hybrid, right? It's like you need to always be building your brand, maintaining your brand, protecting your brand. But at the same time, you also want to be thinking about, are there metrics that I can point to and look to prove that things are working, or prove that things are growing, or prove that things are shifting. And so I think what happens at Amazon, like a lot of other startup companies, is a lot of these companies hit that bell curve and they stop doing brand marketing, right? And so I want to say about seven or 8 years ago, Jeff B basically created the division that I sat on, which was called XCM. And so we actually sat above all these startups. And so we owned the really, really big picture stuff. So we owned like new Amazon customer acquisition, Amazon customer retention for the life cycle of the customer. We owned Prime, the membership program, Alexa, Super Bowl, Climate Pledge. I mean, I would say like anything that is a major, global company priority would typically fall, within our team. And when I joined there, that's Alexa talking. When I joined there, most of what they were doing was traditional, it was like traditional TV ads and, things like that. And for me, it was, how do we become a part of popular culture and entertainment, which really means like being a part of it versus, surrounding it. And so I was overseeing, our integrated marketing across TV, film, music, celebrity. I was doing things with the podcast space where we were trying to, effectively prove measurement models and performance models. And a lot of these things that I did for 3 years, which is a pretty lengthy stay for most at Amazon, we cracked the code because we would have, millions of dollars, and we would have, data scientists in India. And so, by the time I left, there were a lot of things that even today, marketers still scratch their heads on and go, I don't know if this is worth the spend. And that's the nice thing for me is like, I know what is worth the spend. I can't crank the numbers anymore, but at least I know if I'm going to do this, here's how to do it. And here's what not to do. And so that was kind of my experience. And so, I basically built my own kind of, in-house practice. And then that very quickly scaled across, I want to say about 7 countries and something like 12 different product lines. And so I was working with our autonomous vehicles unit. I was helping send Alexa to space with NASA. I mean, you name it, I was probably touching it. And it was exciting. I really enjoyed it. I think, true to kind of what I said before about NBC Universal, I'm definitely not a big traditional company guy. I think my heart definitely belongs more in startups and building. I always tell people I'm an entrepreneur, and part of that is I like to build businesses inside of businesses. I've now done it. This will be my 5th time. So I've actually built 4 different marketing practices from the ground up. Every single one scaled extremely quickly. Every single one's been successful. And so now I'm on to number 5. And I think like the quick background in terms of like what got me into here was I'm an LP in a venture fund myself. I've been a venture investor for years. Interestingly enough, more in the kind of consumer products and retail space. We actually invest in a lot of underserved female founders, and we have a pretty good track record. Like if I showed you the names of the brands, you'd say, "Oh, I know almost all of these." So we've done quite well for ourselves. But as a result of that, I know a lot of VCs, both traditional VCs and non-traditional ones, around the country and the world. And so when I was leaving Amazon, I just went and talked to friends at Andreessen and Coatue and places like that, and just said, where are you guys investing? And pretty much everybody talked about the same four areas. One of which was Web3, crypto, blockchain. It definitely felt like the best alignment for me, just in terms of experience that I had, working with companies like AWS and Amazon, Cisco, and then also just from a personal passion standpoint. And then I'll pump the brakes on that. But when we talk about kind of what brought me to Arbitrum, I'll give you the background in terms of how I kind of figured out where I wanted to be. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Just one question from inside the middle of that. As someone who would be leading the market, and because you definitely come across, and I've definitely came across people in like my old workplace and things like that, where marketing is something that's not as tangible, not as empirical to kind of pitch across to the people who have got the budget.
Yeah.
How do you go about that? Because it seems with a lot of the stuff that you were doing, we're kind of pushing the boundaries, exploring new kind of ways to do it. How do you pitch that idea? Because obviously we're a small kind of startup in and of ourselves in a content platform. For me to kind of go and look for advertisers for this podcast, for example, even though we're reasonably small at this point, it's how do you angle for them to, take the leap, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, there's kind of two things that I would say. One is it's not that dissimilar from being a startup, a founder, right? It's like you're running around trying to convince very wealthy individuals, in the seed phase, like believe in me, invest in me, right? So I think there's a couple of things I would say. One is you have to build this trust, and at Amazon we used to call it earned trust, right? And so for me, for example, it could be my track record. It could be the fact that I've built marketing organizations 4 times. All of them have been successful. All of them have been highly profitable. And so if, a lot of people have always said to me, I'm surprised you've never started your own agency. Like people would invest in that in 2 seconds. It's not interesting for me. It's not what I want to do, or at least today, it's not what I want to do. Right. So I think the track record is important. The second is I think having very legitimate folks vouch for you is important, especially when you're new and especially when you're younger. Like I'll give you guys a little alpha. So one of the things I have with my resume is I have a 1-pager of references, right? And these are like very senior level executives from companies like, Amazon and Netflix and Google and Facebook. And so again, when I meet with someone, let's call it a job interview, you can read my resume and go, wow, this guy's achieved a lot. This guy's, a performer. But then you look at this page and you go and look at everybody that's vouching for him, right? It's like CMO of Verizon, right? Like it's hard to question that person's, opinion of someone, or at least at kind of that level from an operational standpoint. And so I think that the earned trust thing is important. And then if you don't have that earned trust, how do you build trust quickly via folks that maybe have that trust or have a higher level of trust? Then I think, one of the things that's really important, and we did this at Amazon, is really kind of write it out. I think pitch decks are great. They're flashy, they're fun, but sometimes honestly, a 1-sheeter or a 2-sheeter can much more intelligently get an idea across. And I think, especially when you're talking about things like product market fit, total addressable market, that stuff is all tied to data. I mean, you're not pitching, a creative concept for a 30-second commercial. You're pitching a business idea, and businesses typically require business plans, right? So how do you create a lightweight version of a business plan, I guess is part of it. And then I think the last thing is like, if you're able to draw comparison case studies. So, and it doesn't even matter if they're programs or partnerships that you've done, but, let's say, for example, you want to go do, not in crypto, an influencer marketing campaign. If you can go point to 4 other examples where you say, here's the campaign, here's the spend, and here's the back end performance of that, whether it's, product sales, perception shifting, brand building, et cetera, you've got a track record of proving that. And I think like those would probably be my biggest tips. And then for me, because you are right. Like I am very much one of those non-traditional outside the box folks. I think I've just built that brand for myself, right? There's not a ton of us out there. I have a very good friend who is very similar minded. Like if you're familiar with Liquid Death, he's done a lot of the marketing for Liquid Death, which I would argue is probably part of why it's so successful. But there's a small group of us, I think, globally within the marketing community that are, I would call it more like marketing inventors, where we really kind of invent new models and do things differently. And I think, again, that's the brand that I've been, known as. It's the brand that's been built around me. And so I think a lot of companies that will hire me are hiring me partially for that. Right. And so as a result, they want that non-traditional thinking. They want that inventor mindset. Yeah.
Yeah. Love that. So let's focus a little bit more on Arbitrum and a bit of crypto. So what are your kind of favorite things, one as a whole about the whole crypto space, and then probably more closely, what are the things that really stand out that kind of drew you into Arbitrum in and of itself?
Yeah, for sure. So I think just starting about the crypto space, which it's always so funny. It's like some folks crypto, some folks Web3. You can tell how early they started doing their own research based on what term they choose. But I think, a couple things I would look at. Like I am a very intellectually curious person, right? I think a lot of folks in this space get into this space for two reasons. Either they want to make a lot of money, or candidly, they're just very intellectually curious. I would put myself more in the camp of the later. If I weren't a marketer, I'd be a professor probably. I actually guest lecture at all the LA universities for their marketing grad programs. And then funny enough, I'm also on the board of California Department of Education. And so that gives you a sense of just kind of where my brain is. So I think the intellectual curiosity piece is probably the number one thing for me. Even having worked at places like Amazon, I'm blown away every single day by how smart and how curious everyone I meet is in this industry. And it's not to say that everyone is and not that everything's legitimate, but like, I'll have partner calls almost every single day. And it's usually folks that are either already building on Arbitrum or they want to build on Arbitrum. And, they reach out to the partnerships team and they're like, we want to talk to your CMO. And, I always start with, for folks that aren't anonymous, like, where are you from? What's your background? And like, I'm just blown away. I mean, especially in the past 6 months, like I'm just seeing this huge wave of talent, shifting. A lot of folks coming from big tech, a lot of folks coming from academia, a lot of, multi-exit founders. But I think like that, the intellectual curiosity is definitely a big one for me. The second thing is I would just say like inclusion. So one of the funny stories is like when I was at Amazon at corporate, I was helping to lead a lot of our diversity and inclusion efforts for our team. And so I just in general, like, I think about my own child who's 2 years old. I want his world to be the real world. I want it to be inclusive. I want it to I want him to be exposed to a lot of different things and a lot of different people. And I think a lot of traditional businesses, unfortunately, just don't operate that way because we have, institutional biases or we have unconscious biases that, affect our decision making. But I think, part of the anonymous component of crypto, I think definitely brings in a lot more inclusivity. And even what I found at Arbitrum is like, just from a leadership perspective, like I've never seen leaders be so inclusive. And it's really exciting. It makes me go, I hope the rest of Web3 is like this. I hope the future of Web3 is like this. And I also really hope that like this can trickle back to Web2 or whatever, Web2 becomes in the future. So I would say the inclusion piece is a big one for me. And experimentation, I would say, is another big one. So, one of the things I've learned over the years as an investor is like research and development is your best friend. Companies that invest a lot in R&D that also have good cash flow. those are the ones you invest in. And like Warren Buffett, obviously, I think shares the same mindset as that, and he's a lot more successful than I am. But I think one of the things I saw at Amazon, again, this notion of startup factory was just how much money we were putting into R&D and how many different things we were developing and experimenting with. And when I first started interviewing at Arbitrum, and now that I've been there for a while, like I've kind of been blown away by how much R&D is a part of the company. You have Ed Felton, who, for anyone that's not familiar, is arguably one of the most experienced people in the entire industry. And he really leads kind of our research efforts. He's our chief science officer. His team is researching new technologies, trying to invent new technologies. And it's one of, honestly, the most exciting things, not just about Arbitrum, Arbitrum to me, but like crypto in general. Like I hope that other companies are really doing this and leaning into this, because I mean, that is the future. It's things that haven't been invented yet. And then I think the last thing for me is new challenges. So, again, if you've like looked at my website or my background, a lot of what I've done from a marketing perspective, I've invented, right? And was kind of early days. And so I always like new challenges. I think a lot of companies want to hire me to do what I've done before because they're like, he either knows the secret sauce or, he's been doing it longer than others. I enjoy trying to learn new things and trying to crack the code on different things. Cause again, intellectual curiosity. And so some of the things I've looked at getting into this industry and I know this doesn't go for every company, but like we can't really do a lot from a paid media perspective. So we're not going to do, promoted posts on Twitter. We're not going to pay for influencers. And so as a marketer, take a step back and go, wow, well, those were quote unquote tools in my toolbox. So now I need to go invent new tools. And so that's part of the fun, I think, is that, another example I can give you is, if you were to say that to me, oh, you can't buy media, what you're basically saying to me is you can't buy scale and you can't buy targeting. And so then I go, okay, so I need to go build my own scale that can be targeted, which means building, a targeted organic community. And I think one of the easiest and fastest ways to do that is through, first party data. But obviously this industry is all about data privacy and protection to some extent, right? And so even just that, thinking about, if I'm going to build a first party data set, how do I do it in a way that's, fully opt-in and ethical? How do I create an alternative for someone that maybe wants to remain anonymous? And so these, again, are just like, they're new challenges that I have to think about. And candidly, a lot of times I have to invent the solutions. And so I find that very, very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to look at it, actually. Because as you say, a lot of the tools aren't necessarily available to you from the traditional world. So as I say, I look forward to you figuring that one out, actually.
It's going pretty well. I mean, I'm sure there's some multiple reasons for this, but like, as you can see, I'm pretty active on crypto Twitter, but like what you're probably seeing right now is, my personality here, my personality there, a little bit different, but that is like marketing strategy. And it's working. It just takes time and energy, but yeah, luckily, I mean, I've done so many different things over the course of my career that a lot of what I'm doing is saying, can I pull this model from this industry or that industry and apply it here? So at least getting a head start, I guess. And then going back to part two, I guess the Arbitrum story, it was pretty simple. I think, I started doing my own research probably the way anyone else does, which is listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos, reading white papers, reading articles. And I think, again, as someone that was a part of, Web 1, Web 2, that's also worked at the intersection of so many different companies and industries, I realize how early it is. And I think a lot of people don't realize how early it is. I mean, I go back to my days in, AR and VR and social when they were first starting. And I remember how long it took, for mass adoption. I remember how long it took for things to properly scale. And so I believe we're still early. And so that being said, taking a step back, if I'm going to go into a company, as an equity holder, I want to make sure that it's, hopefully going to pay off in the long run, because again, when you go to a startup, you're working so much and so hard, hopefully on something you're passionate about. And so I said to myself, okay, if it's early days, the two things that I probably could bet on right now are data and infrastructure, right? I think normally you would see most folks like myself ending up in layer 3 working for dApps because, these are much more consumer facing products and services and brands. But when we talk about, the Fortune 500 of today and the Fortune 500 of tomorrow, from a traditional business standpoint, I think it's the same thing in crypto, candidly. And so I think there are companies that are around today that may be around tomorrow, that may be leaders tomorrow. And there's certain ones that I'm very bullish on, but there's others that may not be around, right? And so I think for me, it was, that is the place that probably is the most stable right now, at least for the next, 5 to 10 years. And so I started, interviewing at a lot of them. I mean, I won't name names, but, I was interviewing to be the CMO of a number of competitors to Arbitrum, some data, infrastructure companies as well. And I think, part of what I was doing was not just, going after companies that I might want to work at, but really starting to try to understand like the competitive differentiation between them. And, again, if I'm going to land at one of these companies, maybe I can also get some early intelligence on, their focus or strategy or kind of what got them to point A to point B. And so, long story short, I started interviewing with all those companies. Full transparency, got a lot of egos. Which I was surprised by. I guess I assumed most folks in this industry were going to be, again, intellectually curious, probably coming more from, academic backgrounds. But yeah, I definitely got a fair amount of egos. And, when I asked we used to call it diving deep at Amazon, when I asked the deeper questions, would get some kind of surface level-y answers. And so that it didn't really feel great for me from a due diligence perspective. And again, because I've been doing this for so long, like I'm not a developer, but I understand things enough that I can see through the surface a little bit on certain things. And so, started interviewing with them, started asking most of these companies like, hey, if I were to come in, like, where do we steal the good talent from? Where are the best developers? And Arbitrum kind of consistently came up over and over, not just for layer 2 companies, but for others. And so I was like, interesting. Like that's a little bit of alpha for me there. And so, that was kind of the beginning of I guess, my interest in Arbitrum. And then, I started doing a lot more research on the Arbitrum side. And, again, you look at the founders, it's like, Ed Felton, was the head of
it's ridiculous, space. Isn't it?
Princeton. And, Harry and Steven, were his PhD students back in the day. And then you look at, just Ed's career. I mean, deputy CTO of the White House under Obama. It's like, you have to be pretty legitimate and pretty experienced to be sitting in a role like that. And then also when you think about this industry, like having someone that has those relationships that understands that side of things, insanely valuable, right? Because you want to be safe, not just in terms of what you're doing with your developers and your consumers, but you also want to make sure that you're building a platform that has, longevity and isn't going to run into, issues or hiccups down the road, whether that's from a technical perspective or from a, government perspective. So I think that was a good indicator for me. Then, a lot of times when I would ask folks in the industry that I knew, like, hey, what's the best source of factual information? They would continuously bring up the textbook. What is it called? Cryptocurrency Technologies by Ed Felton and Stephen Goldman, right? So then I said to myself, okay, so these guys are clearly very legitimate, but they also wrote a college textbook. Like, that's a good sign, right? In terms of just legitimacy. And then, long story short, I reached out to them directly, and they were just so nice. I mean, so humble. So kind. It just was such a different experience than a lot of the other companies I interviewed with. I will say though, I'll give a shout out to Chainlink. They were also pretty wonderful. I really like those folks. And actually one of the things that's nice is they're one of our biggest partners at Arbitrum. So I actually get to work with them pretty closely. But yeah, it was such a different thing. And I think at the end of the day, I walked away from that first meeting and I was like, these guys are truly doing this to help scale Ethereum. These guys are in this not to buy a bunch of Lambos. They're adults. I have children, they have children. It just, it checked a lot of boxes. And, I kept looking and I was like, all right, founders, check, right? Then I started looking at who the investors were. And again, I'm a VC or an LP and a VC. And they had like the creme de la creme. It was like, Lightspeed on the traditional side, Pantera on the non-traditional, Mark Cuban, who funny enough has invested in a number of businesses that I've been involved with over the years. But it was such a like who's who of investors. And I really liked the list, again, because I know so many of these folks already. Like Redpoint, who's one of our investors, was one of my old investors at TasteBait. So like I love those guys. I think they're amazing. So again, I was really bullish on who the investors were. Then you start to get more into the product side. And if you go to like L2B, I think back then when I was interviewing, we had something like 52% market share of L2s. And I'm sitting here going, no token, no grants, no incentive programs with, other companies, no marketing, and over 50% market share. And the number two has launched a token, has, done incentive programs and is already marketing. And so I'm sitting here going like, this product is
something doesn't add up. Yeah.
This product's very, very good. And and I know a lot of people believe like great products sell themselves. I don't agree with that at all. No. I think great products, help quite a bit, but I think you still have to find, the right audience. You still have to find the right use cases. You still have to find the right messaging. But I'll tell you, like, as a marketer, I would always rather have a great product, because if you have a crappy product, you have to create these false narratives, which we'll talk about in a second, because you're like, I need to spin this thing, right? And I will say also too, as a marketer, I don't love that world, because I do like to look in the mirror at night and feel good about myself. I am a father, and I don't like the idea of trying to basically brainwash people is the way to put it. And in marketing, we call it, perception building, perception shifting. But I would rather build an accurate positive perception or shift a false negative perception than try to build a fake positive perception or shift a fake negative perception. So that was a big thing for me. And then I think also the developer piece, we talked about it before, but the fact that I had talked to so many other companies in the industry, and so many of them had nodded to the fact that the developers at Arbitrum were so great, it just kind of checked all the boxes for me. And so I think, again, the culture piece, just really nice, kind, inclusive people, was kind of the final checkbox for me coming to Arbitrum. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I know, like, 2 points on that. As I was in a biotech, like quite high cap biotech sales job before I completely left that and came into this industry. And I completely understand from what you're saying about that, because I felt like I was going into meetings, putting on a completely different face. I'd been told the pitch. I knew the products inside out, but at the end of the day, I was just like, can one person actually truly believe in this piece, like this biotech instrument, and then try to, like, it just didn't. And this is why I kind of love this space so much, because if you get the right people on board, the right product, you know what you're talking about, and the information that you're getting across is coming from, like, the right place, so to speak.
Yep.
And another thing, what you're saying about the Arbitrum guys, I can completely corroborate on that, because we've worked with about probably 3 or 4, maybe 5 if you count in the Trident guys.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So every single time that I've reached out to anyone from Arbitrum, Off-Chain Labs, for integrations, to learn more about partnerships and things like that, the quickest, friendliest responses out of, I'm not just saying this because you're here, but the quickest and friendliest responses, and the most thorough as well. It's been a complete joy to work with them every single time we have come across. So I can completely back that up.
Yeah, I think part of it too, like, it was so interesting, because when I first started, I want to say there were only maybe 30, 35 people. And I was technically the first marketing hire. We had one community manager, and everyone was so nice and so welcoming and so warm. And, like, as someone that's worked in corporate America his, whole career-ish, it's so not the norm. I mean, normally it's like, who's this new person? Calm down. Like, don't steal my thunder. I'm going to backstab you. And it was like the complete opposite. I mean, like, literally one of the things we do I appreciate it, is we have a meeting. And I remember I think it was like my first or second day, I get on, full stand up, the entire company. And Steven, who's my manager, our CEO, was like, Andrew, introduce yourself. And then literally one by one, every single person at the company got on the computer and, like, introduced themselves and welcomed me. And I was like, I know that'll be hard as we get bigger and scale, but, like, what a just incredible way to make a great first impression. You know what I mean? And we even have another meeting every week on, I think it's on Thursdays, where the entire meeting is literally just shouting out each other for good things that we've done. And it could be like, solving a problem for someone, stepping up and helping someone, but it's kind of a special place. And I really do hope that it remains kind of as magical as it is. I really genuinely love, like, all my coworkers, which this is, Tastemate, I would say, was very similar. And, I had great coworkers at every company, but there's just something special about Arbitrum. And I would say what you see on the outside is pretty similar to kind of what you'd see on the inside. Yeah.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff I want to go on to, but I know we might be pushed for time. But
no worries.
What I really want to get into is, how the hell does Arbitrum have such a ferocious community? Where has that came from? As you say, with no kind of token, no grants, no kind of real incentives to actually be over there and be so vocal and so kind of active about, like,
Yeah.
I can't put my finger on it, to be honest. So I'm hoping you can kind of enlighten me a little bit there.
Yeah, I
What's
mean, the
going on
joke
there?
we always have is like, there's no place like Arbitrum, because, and it's so true. Like, you are right. Like, some of the tweets I've seen recently, and I love it. I love when like new people discover it and then like want to jump in, which I'll explain. But I saw someone post something the other day, and it was like, man, like crypto Twitter is so toxic. But meanwhile, over here, all these Arbitrum, community members are like partying, and
Having the time of their life. Yeah.
yeah, and it kind of feels like that every day. Like you see, I engage quite a bit with the community, and well, first off, I think it's really important to, like, I think at the end of the day, like you have to engage with your community. I mean, they're your customers, they're your builders, they're your partners. Like, how do you not respond to them? I don't understand. Especially in this industry. And so, what I would say is a couple of things. One, I think the tech is that good, right? I think, first off, like our mainnet launched in, and it was up and running before anything was up and running, right? So I think that was obviously helpful, that whole kind of first mover advantage piece. The second thing I would say is the community effectively evolved organically, right? So there weren't any of these manipulation tactics happening. And I think like you could say, oh, well, manipulation tactics are how you grow quickly or scale, maybe so, but I think what happened was, it really kind of grew through word of mouth, right? So some people came in, directly through Arbitrum because they're like, wow, this is fully EVM compatible. Like, it's an intuitive experience that I'm familiar with. I've already been developing, on Ethereum. So I think anyone that's like an ETH maxi instantly sees the opportunity, right? Because it's like lower gas fees, faster speeds, very similar experience, if not a little easier, right? So check. I think the other thing is like, there was no what I would call like token manipulation tactics. So, if you buy your Ethereum, obviously you can go to Arbitrum and bridge it over, but you can also bridge it directly when you purchase it on some of the exchanges like the, crypto.coms and Binance's of the world. So I think that was probably also something that made developers happy, because it's like, it's another step I don't have to take. It's another gas fee I don't have to pay. And then I think candidly what's happened is more and more folks that have built on Arbitrum have realized, to your point, like, the technology is great. The developers are responsive. The founders like actually listen to community feedback. And so again, if you're going to pick a place to build for the long run, you want to check the same boxes that I checked as someone looking to find a new home. And so I think it's everything from like, trusted leaders, looking at the quality of the product, looking at all the R&D and inventions that are happening. I mean, look at just Nitro alone since I started. I mean, we're looking at transaction speeds that are up like 10x. And you could argue Nitro was like invented, via our R&D department, right? And so again, I think, if you're smart and tech savvy, you see that this is really like the place to be. And I think also once you see the, plus 50% market share, that kind of says, okay, this must just be a really great product. And because this is all word of mouth marketing, effectively.
Speaks for
right?
itself. Yeah.
It speaks for itself. Yeah. Right. And then again, like I've never really heard of anyone going on and building and then saying, oh, I had the worst experience. Like I had to take this token and convert it into another token. Like, oh, it was a whole new programming language. Oh, the interface looked totally different. Like, no. Because again, like that's our goal. Our goal is to scale Ethereum. Right. And I think if you look back at, Ed, Steven, and Harry's backgrounds, like it's so interesting to me because they built Arbitrum pre-Ethereum, right? And so in my head, I said, well, why didn't you build, an alternative layer one? Like, didn't you want all that, TVL? And no, for them, it was like, no, like we knew that whatever the base layer was going to be, there were going to be scalability issues, right? Because security, decentralization, scalability, you can't have all three, right? Yeah. And so they're like, we're going to build the scalability layer and wait for something where we believe in the security and decentralization enough because we're going to inherit that, right? And so that's why, everybody on crypto Twitter is like Arbitrum equals Ethereum, because it does. I mean, we're literally just building the scalability layer on top of it. And then even if you look at our recent kind of merger with Prismatic Labs, who built the Prism client, same exact mindset. Like I was just with Preston and Raul recently. I mean, first off, I've never seen two companies have like a better cultural fit. Like I genuinely love everybody at Prismatic Labs, but also like everybody's on the same path. I think everyone's really focused on this notion of like, how do we scale Ethereum? How do we bring Web3 to the masses? I don't see a lot of future Lambo owners on that team either. You know what I mean? By the way, not to say if anyone out there wants a Lambo, don't get a Lambo, but like,
I just think in general, we're all in it for similar reasons. And so with that merger, you're now just seeing that much more talent focused on the same goal, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think that was really important. And then I think other than that, this notion of community, like one of the jokes that I always make on crypto Twitter, but it's not really a joke, because I always say, like, I'm not a CMO of Arbitrum, I'm a CMO of the Arbitrum ecosystem, right? And again, having worked in B2B marketing, B2C, B2D, all these different areas in the past, I really do understand the power of community and the power of all boats rise together, or all tides rise together, I should say. And so you'll see even on my Twitter as much kind of marketing and promotion of things like DopeX and GMS and TreasureDAO as you do Arbitrum. And then for new partners, probably even more, because it's like we're trying to get them off the ground. And the way I look at it is, I'm like, if that company can be successful and attract users, what that's going to do is build TVL for us. And then if someone's making transactions on that platform or in that game, those are transactions that are going to benefit us. So at the end of the day, the success of all the companies that sit on top of Arbitrum directly correlates into our own success. And then again, I was talking about this before as a marketer, a lot of times those things at layer 3 are a lot more fun and exciting and sexy. So like, it's kind of fun. I get to almost help market all of our community's products while simultaneously marketing Arbitrum. And then we all win together, and from what I've heard from a lot of others, they didn't experience this at other places. Like I've heard from founders, like they couldn't get an email response, or, they couldn't get on the phone. And, I can't tell you how many times a week I literally just jump on the phone with a founder, and they're like, I just want to see if you have any ideas. And I'm just like, here you go. Here's 4 creative ideas, run with them, no charge. And then even like, I'll tell you, we believe so much in community that like, I just hired a new community manager from our community. And I really do believe in that. Like, I think this whole notion of we're just going to take the best of Web 2 and bring them into Web 3 is so wrong. I mean, I think there's great Web 2 talent that deserves to be in Web 3, that should be in Web 3. But at the same time, things like, community management, technical writing, Solidity development, I mean, these are all going to be crypto native folks. Yeah. And I think folks that don't understand that, that are purely looking for, where'd you go to college? Where'd you work before? Are going to miss the mark, right? And so I think, again, like, our community is authentic, it's organic, it was built that way. And then I honestly think sometimes like the community members themselves are some of the best marketing. I mean, we have one member, I'll name names. We have one member of the community that goes by The Shred, where all he does, and he's like one of my favorite people in the entire community. He's based in Australia. And then what he does is he like gets on camera, these like total pump you up hype videos. And then he like literally shreds his shirt and usually has like written on his chest. And you're like, this is so like, you're saying like, okay, we're like a scaling solution for Web3. Like we're not like, the Manchester game, but I love it. And I'm like, that was something that candidly got me excited about our community. Yeah. And I'm sure the random person that sees it when I retweet it out to, how many thousands of people sees it, but it's like, we do have a lot of these community members. Like we have other community members that write incredible threads. We have other community members that are like the best shit posters you've ever seen. It's like one very big, fun, non-traditional family. And I really do look at a lot of these folks as like members of our company. I know they don't work at Arbitrum, but like they're doing as much for the growth of Arbitrum and the growth of the ecosystem as maybe my team is, right? And so I think it's really important to like acknowledge those folks, celebrate them, support them. Like I messaged him the other day, like, how many t-shirts do I need to send you? But I think like, yeah, I mean, we are different and you can see it. I mean, even sometimes I'll go into Discord just to look at, one of our posts versus a competitor's, and, you'll see like 1,000 different, like reactions to one of our posts, and you'll see like 7 on the other. And you're like, yeah, I thought your community was bigger than that, so it's, quality over quantity. I always say, and this is true as a marketer, like, you should always care more about engagement than you do vanity metrics like followers. And we have a pretty darn engaged community. And when I talk to a lot of like new builders, even that come in, they always say to me, that's definitely one of the factors. They're like, we want quick adoption. And especially in a bear market when, quote unquote, crypto Twitter's dead, they're like, there's so much activity on Arbitrum. It's like all I ever see. I did another podcast and, I did this little marketing stunt, and he literally did a screenshot because every single person had been like promoting Arbitrum, and he wrote, Andrew Saunders broke Twitter for me today. and yeah, we like it that way, and we try to be positive. I mean, again, like I really do believe in our product and our team more than others. I mean, that's why I'm here, but we try not to like bash anyone or anything like that. And if we do something, it's all in good fun, you know? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. So I want to use your phrase of, is it dive deeper questions?
Dive deep. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
It was on leadership principles. Yeah.
So, I know this because there's a fine line between what we do as a content platform and
Sure.
some of the more murkier aspects and some of the more murkier people that are out in the landscape. So, from your perspective, particularly from a marketing and kind of content lens, what are the kind of current issues and what are some of, like, as I say, like the more shady tactics that can be used? Because we do get an awful lot of market participants that come into the space a little bit naive, and this is the reason why you have the likes of BitBoy and others that have extremely large following, but 99% of those are kind of new to the space but don't necessarily know where to go. But this guy's got 1 million followers, so he must know what he's talking about, you know. Right. And there's that the same thing happens with projects. The same thing happens with projects, and the same thing happens with networks and different chains. So, like, what from your perspective, what can people do to just be a little bit aware of what's going on?
I'll give you a little alpha on here for your own marketing purposes. I'm actually I can't talk about it, but I'm actually working on something that hopefully helps with this. Because I would say as a marketer, when I first entered this space, I'm not crypto native, right? Mm-hmm. I was a passionate retail investor, NFT trader, but I don't come from this space. And so, like most folks entering the space, I knew what was being told. And I think one of the biggest problems is, and it's not just podcasts, it's podcasts, it's articles, it's YouTube. I mean, you name it, is just this lack of fact checking, right? And I don't think that the lack of fact checking comes from a place of people not wanting to fact check. I don't think it comes from a place of like manipulation. I think where it comes from is like, and this world is so complex, right? I work inside Arbitrum. I have an hour a week with, Ed Felton, where he basically just teaches me. And then I've got an army of developers that are just like so kind and so generous with their time. And I would say, like, I'm still scratching the surface, you know what I mean? And I've learned a lot. But I think, again, like, it's just so complex that the average person just doesn't even know what questions to ask or what things to question or what to quote unquote dive deep on. And again, I don't know that that's anyone's fault, right? And I think over time, this will resolve itself, right? I think you'll get, reporters and hosts that just become more, intelligent, that, have been through different experiences, and as a result may just start to ask different questions. And those questions may also result in, more truthful answers. But I think like the biggest issue right now, in my opinion, is really this notion of like fake narratives, right? And I'll give you a great example. So when I was doing my own research, and this is a nice little trick actually for anyone that's new to Web3. What I would do is I would open CoinGecko. I'll show you. I'd open CoinGecko, and then I would go into categories, which they do a really nice job, and you can categorize it by alphabetical. I'll use the Arbitrum one as an example. But basically, you open it up into categories, and then you can go into the different categories, right? So I can click on analytics. I can click on centralized exchanges. I can click on decentralized exchanges, DeFi, derivatives, staking, fan tokens, gambling, gaming. And so what I would do is I would go into those categories and I would look at who had the most market share. And then I would go listen to a podcast episode about that company, right? Because I would say, okay, if I listen to one in each category, I'll understand the category, but I'll also understand it from like the market leader, which will hopefully also give me some sense of like why they're the market leader, right? Were they first mover advantage, better technology, who knows? So that's kind of how I started my DYOR journey. And, I'll be honest with you, like, I believed most of what I heard, right? Because I'm hearing things that are very technical. I'm hearing things that are just basically broad questions. And what I've come to realize now that I've been in this industry for a long time is, there's a lot of fiction out there. And I like to refer to this as like twisted truths. Like, I don't want to go as far as to say people are out there blatantly lying. I just think that there's a lot of folks out there where they take something and the way that they present it isn't, I guess I would say 100% accurate or ethical, right? So for example, there's, certain things that I've seen in this space. And then luckily, again, I have Ed. I go to Ed and I say, I'm so confused because based on this conversation that I had with one of our developers last week, I didn't think that this was possible. And then, what's told to me is, well, it's not. Like, it could be in the future. And then I dig in and I go, well, then how is someone talking about this? And then you do a little bit of research, whether it's DYOR or whether it's talking to other folks in the industry, and you find out, oh, this is in pre-alpha phase. Or you're like, this is in white paper development phase. And I think, like, even with white papers, one of the things that I've learned that's so strange to me and so different from like the world that I come from as an investor in startups is what I'm used to is a founder coming in and saying, and I know it's a little different because I'm talking consumer products, here's my business idea, here's the product, here's the roadmap, here's when we're going to be in market, here's the growth plan for 3 years. But you look at it and go, all right, I'm investing in an athleisure business. I'm an athleisure investor, or I'm investing in a celebrity pet food brand. Like, I know exactly what I'm getting. And I know in tech, obviously it's a little bit different, but I think in Web 2, again, most of what's pitched to me, even though I don't invest in a lot of this stuff, is like an app, or a SaaS platform, or, some sort of data tool. And these are all things that I know for a fact can be built, right? Because other versions of them have been built before. What's different in Web 3 is you read these white papers and you go, wow, that's incredible. Or wow, that's going to change the game. But what you don't realize is that the goal may be too ambitious is maybe the way to put it, right? And so what'll happen is large VC investors will throw money into these companies because they're like, I don't want to miss out on this opportunity. And also the way I typically invest is I only need 1 of 100 to hit, that's how most big traditional VCs operate. And so it's a little bit of like, even if I don't understand this white paper, or I don't understand whether or not this is theoretically possible, I don't care enough to not take the risk, right? And so I think where I get a little caught up is, especially from a retail investor standpoint, is like when I read a white paper and then I start to talk to my developers and then they start to say to me like, yeah, that might be possible in 10 years, or that might be possible in 5 years, or I don't think that's ever possible. That's concerning for me, right? Because, someone that's going to go down the rabbit hole and read that white paper, it's almost like, well, do you have to put a disclaimer at the bottom of a page that says, does not exist yet, or may not theoretically be possible? Because there are, how it is. It's like when influencers market, it's like sponsor post, right? But I just argue that like there's a lot of things that are theoretical that are not tangible. And the word I always hear is vaporware, right? There's a lot of vaporware out there. And I think, again, like, you just continue to look at teams. You look at like, are they being truthful about their product? Are they being truthful about their narrative? Are they actually hitting, benchmarks against their roadmap? But, once I was in this industry, it didn't take me very long to start to see like what was legitimate and what wasn't, and who was honest and who wasn't. And, again, I'm not going to throw anyone under the bus, but I just would say like, do your own research 3 times, and also if you read a white paper, like, maybe do a little research on, is this theoretically possible? Or if it's not, like, when could it be possible? Because you might be investing in something that has like a 20-year roadmap. You know what I mean? And I think, again, that's like a little bit of just this notion of like transparency and trust. And I think, again, like, I'll give you another example of like twisted truths. Like, I see sometimes BD deals go out. And then again, I've got a very large network of relationships in all these industries. I'll make a phone call and do a little due diligence, and I'll find out, oh, that was paid for, by a Web3 company. But then the way it hits the press and the way that it's talked about was like, very similar to actually what happened for us in Reddit. So Reddit had this thing called the Community Bake Off, where they were trying to decide on what chain they wanted to use to bring Reddit community points. And so it was a competition, and they ended up choosing Arbitrum, because they decided it was the right technology for them to build on, right? Or for this to live on. And so again, when we did a press release, I think, both sides acknowledge like, yes, like Arbitrum was chosen, right? And that is what I would call like a very non-twisted, accurate, press piece, right? And, obviously we don't have a token, so there's no pumping going on that day, but, had we had one, maybe we would have seen some sort of activity happen, right? Who knows? But what happens for me is when I see companies in Web3 go in and I've now heard of this happening with numerous companies. It's not just like one bad actor, but it's like they're running around doing BD deals with either, large scale tech companies, entertainment companies, Web 2 companies. And they're paid for. They're paid BD deals where significant money is shifting hands in one direction. And then the narrative is, we're the choice of this company or we're winning. We're with this company. And it's like, you're with that company because you paid to be with that company. And so one of the things I know, it's like, I really don't like it. It's super unethical in my opinion. And by the way, it's not unethical to do those deals. It's just unethical to message it that way. Just be transparent. Just say we've invested, a significant amount of money into this company. We're going to be building this new product together. But I actually don't think there's anything wrong with telling people that you're investing in, these traditional companies to help bring them to Web3. But the whole narrative of like, we were selected, we were picked when you paid for it, it's a big turnoff for me. We won't be doing those types of announcements, that's another one. And then, and actually one thing to know that's helpful for like non-marketers is this notion of what I would call like one-sided announcements. So I can talk about this because I worked at, NBC Universal and Amazon, which are two large scale businesses. But at the end of the day, like when I was working with Amazon and we would do like a large scale AWS deal with a client, right? Obviously that client was, paying us significant funds, but then there was, typically a value exchange. It might be we were agreeing to advertise with that company, or maybe we were agreeing to, use that company's services for our needs. But it was a very like symbiotic relationship. Obviously one side, benefited more than the other, but there was a value transfer on both sides, right? I think that the challenge that I would always have is, when we did those deals, the other company, the external company would come in and say, we want to do a press release, right? Acknowledging this partnership. And we would say, yes, right? So we would talk to our corp comm team and we would say, we want to announce this new partnership. And they would usually say, okay, here are the things we're comfortable saying. Here are the things we're not comfortable saying. But a lot of times we'd have press releases coming from, our company, and there'd be press releases coming from their company, right? What I see in Web3 and crypto quite a bit, which is concerning, is I see press releases only coming from one side. And when I see that, it usually means one of two things. Because again, I've been there, I've done this. It either means one, they think it's too risky to do a press release. So for example, like let's say I'm at this water bottle company, terrible example, I just realized. And I'm going to go partner with this crypto company. If in any way I worry that partnership could impact my brand negatively. Either someone thinks less of my company, or it could put a consumer at risk, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to release a press announcement because I don't want to amplify it, right? I know I'm doing a somewhat risky deal, but maybe I'm doing it for the right reasons. But that being said, it's still risky. And so I want to kind of downplay it. I don't want to like go out there and shout about it. So when I see Web3 companies shouting about a deal and I see nothing coming from the other side, like that's concerning to me, right? Yeah. I'm not going to go ahead and say it means something was paid for, but like that could be a reason behind it, right? And then the second one for me is, and this, but like when you pay for a deal, legally the other company can't like pretend like they didn't, right? So it's very similar to like when you pay for an influencer, right? So let's say, I'm at a Web 2 company and a Web 3 company paid me $5 million to do this BD deal. I can't put out a press release that says like, I evaluated all the best technology and this was the winner, because that's a lie, right? Yeah. And hypothetically, like I could get sued for that as a large company if and when someone were to find out about that. And so again, when I see large companies not talking about, these big news and big announcements, but I see the other side in Web3 like talking about it every single day, what that says to me is either one, the Web 2 company thinks it's too risky to acknowledge it, which is also not a good thing. Or two, and this is probably the more likely scenario, there was a transfer of funds in one direction and they can't say it because hypothetically that fake narrative could get them in legal trouble,
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly when this industry is on the surface. And again, for a lot of people, it's just a game of kind of attention economy. Whereas there's much more to that. Like it's the whole attention economy game comes in, and you know it's coming in because friends and family start messaging when Doge is like doing its thing and ripping, and then everyone feeds into the attention economy thing. But the infrastructure and everything that's being built, that's never the stuff that gets shouted about from the rooftops. It's always, like the idiots.
It's like, look at this deal, look at this new technology. And it's like, and then I sit here going, that technology is not real and that deal was paid for. Moving on. But it's a problem because, and I get it. It's like, I think, again, if your technology is subpar, or if you've already had a liquidity event, you're playing that game. You're playing the spec pump game. I mean, not super dissimilar in the traditional stock market, but I think, again, like, it's just so important to be transparent and to be honest. Because, by the way, there are people that may want to buy that, that token on the back of that news, even if the news is truthful. And by the way, maybe there's less people because there's less excitement around it, but it's not to say that a truthful announcement isn't going to drive consumer excitement. It could, but I think like unethical excitement's going to drive unethical pump. That's my personal opinion. Yeah.
Right. So we've personally been a helping hand in getting some of our kind of advisory and portfolio companies over to Arbitrum, particularly the Trident boys, who I never have a dull meeting with.
Oh yeah, they're entertaining.
Monolith from Trident, but is gaming a major focus, or is there any kind of other aspects that you'd love to see more of in the ecosystem, or build what people can actually bring to the Arbitrum ecosystem?
Yeah, no, great question. And I'll go back to kind of like what brought me to Arbitrum a little bit. So, for me, as a trader myself, obviously when you're building a DeFi dApp, like there's so much more inherent risk, right? Because you're talking about much larger sums of money. You're talking about, significantly larger transfers of value. So at the end of the day, I think if you're going to build a DeFi company, you're looking for arguably the safest and most stable home, right? And so when I first joined Arbitrum, I think the quote unquote narrative was like Arbitrum is the home of DeFi in layer 3, or excuse me, in layer 2. Let me just restate that. I think the narrative was, Arbitrum is the home of DeFi in layer 2, right? Because it's like everybody was on Arbitrum 1. I think at the end of the day, that has continued to be the case. Every time I meet with a new DeFi company, obviously they're typically saying to me, Arbitrum 1 is where we're going to build. And then I think, with NFTs, you started to see, especially for, let's call it like higher value collections, or even like a treasure DAO, someone that's really building for like the long term. Like, as a marketer that's worked with like every gaming company you can think of, like I look at those guys and I'm like, there's a lot of interesting things under the hood there. Even just the fact that they chose to build on one is like a good signal for me. So obviously you saw a bit of an uptick beyond DeFi on Arbitrum 1, but I think what's so exciting is Arbitrum Nova, right? So where Arbitrum 1 is an optimistic roll-up technology, Arbitrum Nova is an AnyTrust technology. And what it does is it basically lends itself even better to things that require even faster speeds and even more, transaction volume, right? Because at the end of the day, they're both, extremely secure and stable. But like when you're talking about significant high value exchange, numbers, you want to be, triple buttoned up, right? And so what's happened with Nova is I think, the kind of conversations that I've been having has been, we always wanted to build on Arbitrum, but one wasn't the right home for us based on what we were building, which is usually gaming and social. And now that we have Nova, I think what we always say to folks is, now we have a home for gaming and social, right? So what I've started to see quite a bit is, one, the social aspects. So obviously Reddit built their community point system. You're talking about 500 million, potential users and traders, which is incredible. As I'm sure you're aware and I'm aware, we're starting to see more Web3 social platforms emerge. It's still early days, but I would love to see some of those social platforms come to Arbitrum, because I think one, it'll be a great developer experience, and two, it'll just be a great user experience because the apps will move quickly. Transaction fees will be very, very low. So I think there's a lot of room for social. And then on the gaming side, what's been really interesting to me is like we've definitely had some partners that we already work with that are like building games, on the back of other IP that they already have. And even if that IP lives on one, a lot of times they're choosing to build the game on Nova, which I think is super exciting. The other thing that I'm seeing is a lot of gaming companies that have built on other chains in the past
And there's one of two kind of mindsets that I'm seeing. It's either I believe in a multi-chain future, which I think a lot of us do. I believe in a multi-chain future. And I want to build on Arbitrum 2 and let, the users decide where they're going to play my game, which I think is a smart move, right? You see a lot of things built on Ethereum and Arbitrum, which I think, by the way, makes total sense, because it's like, if you're an Ethereum maxi and you want to stay on there and you want to pay higher, gas fees and you want slower transactions, like that's your choice. But I always say, like, we really do inherit the security and decentralization of Ethereum. So like all you're doing is just saving, time and money. So I think that's the beginning of it. But a lot of the games that I'm seeing being built are really kind of, at least from what I've seen, I mean, most Web3 games that I played to date, it's really just like staking your NFT. Some of the games that I'm now seeing, I wouldn't go as far as to say we're getting towards the like console, game space, but like they're really interesting. Like I'm seeing things that mimic, I'm a big board game player and fan. I'm seeing things that mimic like board game engines a little bit more, which is really cool, because you can imagine, what if I'm playing like Dominion, the card game, or, what if I'm playing like, trying to think of a game everybody would know, like Terraforming Mars. Like those are all things that I honestly think at this point could live in Web3 and actually be like fun, interesting experiences. Because that's the problem today, is the games haven't been fun. And then like another example is we're working with a company called AI Arena, where, and this is interesting for me because I used to work with Alexa for years in the AI space. They're merging like AI and gaming, which I think is super interesting and didn't expect to see. And so again, when you talked about kind of like, what are you seeing that's out there? I would say like most of the really inventive stuff that I'm seeing is in the gaming space. Just new tokenomics, new models, new gameplay, things that actually look fun to play. Like I'm sure you've seen those little tiny Nintendo and Super Nintendos.
Yeah.
But like those are still fun. Like I'll plug those into my TV and go play Super Mario Brothers. Like it's not, it's not like a modern game, but like it's still fun. And I would argue like that's what we're going to start to see, is more of that type of thing. And also anyone that's ever been in the traditional gaming space knows, like, to develop a really great high graphic game, like that takes years, like I come from more traditional Hollywood. To make a motion picture can take 6 years, right? To make a great game can take 6 years. I used to work with some of our gaming clients at CA, like Will Wright, who created The Sims. And so I remember how much time and energy and work goes into making this stuff. And so I think we're just early, right? And it's probably a reason that I still buy a lot of NFTs. And I guess, not investment advice. I buy a lot of NFTs that are tied to like gaming economies. So I do buy a lot of treasure stuff myself, because I just sit here and I go like, okay, like art is art and there'll always be a home for art. And I buy NFTs that I love the artwork in. But when we think about gaming, like if we just imagine that the Web3 games that we're seeing today are V1, and that the end game is, let's call it V7, like how does my asset from V1 move to V7? I mean, it's easy for me to see. Like I was looking at, was it like Forgotten Runes the other day, and the wizards, if you look at the roadmap, it's like they're doing 3D characters of them. And, I can imagine that long-term down the road, you're playing, a Forgotten Runes, wizards game, and like, you've got an incredibly dope looking wizard that you own, but the V1 of that wizard was this tiny little pixelated guy that could spin around in circles, so you got to think long term. And that's also part of why I went to Arbitrum, is like, I'm a long-term thinker. And so, even if there are folks that have, higher TVL, even though we surpassed Avalanche this week, so we're now number 5. I think it's a long game, and I believe in Arbitrum from a long-term perspective. And like, again, I'm not going to do unethical things for short-term wins and short-term growth. Like I'm going to do what's right for the company. I'm going to do what's right for the product. I'm going to do what's right for the users. I'm going to do what's right for the community. And if that means it's going to take us a little bit longer, so be it. That's our goal. Our goal is to still be here. Our goal is to still be strong. And I'll tell you, like when crypto winter hit, like our community's still here and they're still super active. And I can't say that about all the others. And again, it's because we've been here for the right reasons since day one, and will remain here for the right reasons. And most of our community is builders, right? And builders are long-term thinkers. They're not like, let me just build this product and quickly flip it and make, $5 million, the way some of the NFT stuff works. I mean, these guys are building products and they're truly trying to change entire industries, So,
despite it being that crypto winter, and as you say, with those builders, it's probably the most active place to be at the minute. But at the same time, I guarantee they know in the back of their heads it still hasn't had its day, which is kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy to say, and we probably look back on this in like a year, maybe 2 years, 3 years time, and just think, Jesus, yeah. When Andrew's saying
I'll
how
put it
early
this
we
way,
were.
like, I've invested in a lot of startups, and a lot of my friends will call me when they want to go to a startup. They'll say, I'm done with big business, but I'm going to take a pay cut. So I need to know that this equity is going to, be worth something. And I'll put it this way. Every single startup that I put a friend in has exited, right? In one way or another. Like, so you better believe that when I'm picking the startup that I'm going to work at, like I'm doing a lot of due diligence, and there is nothing prior to starting here that didn't tell me that this place is special. And then now that I've been here, it's even more special than I thought it was. And I'll leave that at that.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, Andrew, I could sit and talk all day.
Yeah, likewise. This is fun.
I'd love to pick your brain some more as well, but maybe we can run it back in a couple of months' time or something when there's more developments happen. And once again, thanks very much for joining us. And if any kind of really easy places to find you guys, obviously your Twitter's blowing up at the minute. The easiest is arbitrum.io, where you can like join the community. So we've got links to all of our social profiles there. Developer docs, like I would definitely jump in and read some of those docs. And then if you're a builder, I mean, we always say this jokingly, but it's true. I mean, you can really start building your first app in under 5 minutes. So if you've never experienced it, like go experience it for yourself. And I honestly think in 5 minutes you'll see why so many people just organically choose to build on Arbitrum. And then we are definitely hiring and growing. I think like obviously everyone right now is shrinking or consolidating or being conservative. We are growing. Like we are growing across the board around the world. So we post all of our jobs on Lever, and they're also on the arbitrum.io website. So definitely keep an eye on those. And like I said, we love crypto native folks. So I would say we definitely have folks coming from Web 2, but we also have folks coming from Web 3. So definitely check that out. And then in terms of social, I think it's important, like we only have a few handles that are verified Arbitrum handles. Our main handle is at Arbitrum. We also have a handle Arbitrum devs, which is more developer focused. We also have a handle Arbitrum_CN, which is in Mandarin. So for anyone in APAC that wants to engage in Mandarin, that's there. Our Discord is obviously super, super popular. A lot of interesting community members having fun in there as well. And then we actually just launched another new handle, which is exciting, called Arbitrum Core. And the idea here is like, play on space and planet's core of the planet. Like our ecosystem is core to our company. And so this is a place where if you really want to dive into like ecosystem partners, I mean, we have over 500 dApps now. So it's obviously we can't, retweet 5 things per company a day, but this is the place where you're going to see more of that, right? So I would think the Arbitrum handle is all things Arbitrum and a couple big things here and there from ecosystem partners. The core handle is like, I want to live, breathe, eat, sleep the ecosystem. That's the place to be. So I'll be there quite a bit, as you could imagine. We have another fun handle that's about to come out, which I won't say anything about. But it's very fun and very degen, and I'm sure the community members will end up loving it. And we're on Telegram. Those are basically the best places to find us. And then for me, as you can see, because I'm a marketer, it's been on screen the entire episode. My handle is at Andrew Saunders. And you will recognize my green dead fellows with a red bow tie, which by the way is an Ethereum NFT. And the reason that's okay is because Arbitrum equals Ethereum. Perfect. Andrew, thanks so much. Make sure all those handles are checked and verified and in the description as well. And thanks for listening, everyone. Please, I'm the worst person at doing this, but please do all the like and subscribe stuff. It does help us.
Smash that subscribe button, friends.
We will flip bankless one day. You just
should I give you my layer 2 out?
Right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Cheers. It was so nice to meet you. Take care.